Okay, now I've taken my soil sample and I've added a little bit of water to it. So I want you to imagine that the soil from my yard is eroding into the nearest stream or into a nearby river. Now I also want you to imagine that you are a fish or some other aquatic animal whose normal habitat is a clear river or a clear stream. So lots of sunlight gets through the water and you can see what's going on around you, and your gills are always kept nice and fresh with all that lovely oxygen coming in. And all of a sudden, now we have sediment pollution. Now we have erosion of soil off of the land and is coming into your habitat. Well, this is what that soil sample looks like when I mix it with a little bit of water. And you can see that it is very turbid. Now, turbid is a fancy scientific word that means light cannot pass through it. We have a very high amount of sediment pollution caused by the running off of the soil from my front yard. Okay, so if you are a fish and your normal habitat was clear stream water, could you survive in this? Well, most fish can survive periods of high sediment pollution for short periods of time, but over a long period of time, you're going to have trouble surviving. And if more and more and more soil keeps eroding from the land and the level of sediment pollution keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that habitat is no longer going to be suitable for you. Now I want you to imagine that you are an aquatic plant and your normal habitat is clear water, so sunlight can pass through the clear water and can help you grow. Now, with the water so high in sediment pollution and so high in turbidity, that is, again, a fancy word that means that light cannot pass through it, can the sunlight pass through this water and reach your leaves and help you grow? Well, obviously, it cannot. So this could also damage you if you were a plant. And this is why scientists frequently spend a lot of time and effort measuring and trying to prevent sediment pollution, because it can have a very severe effect on a stream or a river ecosystem. So now I'd like to go over an experimental procedure that you can do that will allow you to study the types of ecosystems that are present in different bodies of water and learn a little bit more about sediment pollution. So to do this experiment, you are going to need some tap water. You don't have to have any fancy distilled water. Tap water will do. You're going to need a clear glass or a clear plastic jar. Now, a jar that is tall and thin will work best, but any jar will work as long as you can see through it clearly. Tall and thin is better. Now, you also will want some lake muck or some soil from your yard, or maybe some sand from the bottom of a river. You're going to need some way to stir or shake the sample, so you may want to have a spoon or some kind of a stirring rod. You're going to need a clock or a timer, and I would definitely go with a clock instead of a timer, because sometimes this experiment could go a long time, and you may find it more convenient to use a clock instead of a little timer. And you're going to need a ruler. Now, if you want to study a little bit more and learn a little bit more, you're going to need a magnifying glass and a shallow dish, and you will also want to have a small magnet. Okay, so let's talk about how we can measure, how we can understand sediment pollution and how we can measure what's happening at the bottom of a lake. So let's imagine that you're going to use a sample from a lake. So you're going to take a sample of the lake muck and you're going to put it in your jar until your jar is about half full. Then you're going to fill the jar all the way to the top with water, and you're going to shake it or you're going to stir it very, very vigorously. And then You're going to keep shaking or stirring until you've completely mixed the sample and the water. Your sample should look like this when you have finished stirring. You see how it's nice and uniformly gray colored or dark colored from the bottom to the top of the jar. Now, once you have that sample and water completely mixed, you are going to set the jar aside and you're going to start the timer or note what time it is on the clock. Now, this jar, I had shaken this jar up about 2 hours ago. So this is how much the sediment has settled back down in 2 hours. You can see the top of this jar is getting more and more clear, and all of the solids, the sand, the silt, and the clay, are now settling down to the bottom. And I'm going to leave this to settle some more. Okay, step 4. You're going to stop the timer or note the time on the clock when the water is clear. This is not quite ready to stop the clock just yet. I'm going to have to probably let it sit overnight before the water becomes completely clear. Once that happens, let me see if I can, you're going to see what is in the sediment. Now remember, we have 3 kinds of particles that are in sediment. We have sand, we have silt, and we have clay. And the sand, being the biggest and the heaviest, settles out at the very beginning. So all of the sand and heavy particles will sink to the bottom. The clay and the silt will settle down on top of the sand, and you may, if you're lucky, you'll see a very, very fine layer of silt or clay on top of the other 2 layers. You may not see this top layer of very, very fine particles on top of the clay and silt layer. Hopefully you will. All right, what's the big deal? Why do scientists worry about that? What is this telling you about the ecosystem, and what is that telling you about the conditions at the bottom of the lake, or the conditions in the river, or the potential for some ground to create sediment pollution? I'm going to let you worry about that while I pause the video.